Have you ever wondered why some women emerge from profound suffering with a radiant inner strength while others remain trapped in cycles of despair? This question haunts us in those quiet moments when we confront our own capacity for resilience in the face of life's inevitable wounds. Most of us find ourselves adrift when confronting the deepest challenges of human existence, searching for meaning in our pain, yet lacking the philosophical framework to transmute suffering into genuine strength. The profound insights of Immanuel Kant, though centuries old and often shrouded in academic complexity, contain transformative wisdom that can illuminate this journey from pain to power. Many view Kantian philosophy as an impenetrable fortress of abstract reasoning, creating a seemingly insurmountable barrier between his revolutionary ideas and their practical application in our emotional lives. Perhaps you too have felt that sense of intellectual inadequacy when attempting to access philosophical wisdom that might guide you through your darkest moments. That frustrating gap between knowing there are answers and actually grasping them in a way that transforms your lived experience. By the end of our exploration today, you will understand how Kant's concepts of autonomy, dignity, and moral law provide a clear and applicable framework for recognizing the signs of genuine spiritual strengthening after pain. This knowledge won't merely expand your intellectual understanding of resilience, but will fundamentally transform how you perceive the human capacity to derive meaning and purpose from suffering. Understanding these principles now could immediately enhance your ability to recognize authentic spiritual growth in yourself and others, allowing you to distinguish between superficial coping mechanisms and profound inner transformation. Join me as we embark on this philosophical journey to discover the 6 profound signs of women who have truly strengthened their spirit after experiencing deep pain, viewed through the clarifying lens of Kantian ethics and metaphysics. The first sign of a woman who has truly strengthened her spirit through pain is the reclamation of autonomy in her moral decisions. Kant's concept of autonomy stands as one of his most revolutionary contributions to ethical thought, challenging us to consider what it truly means to act from an internally generated moral law, rather than merely conforming to external authorities or emotional impulses. When pain enters our lives, whether through betrayal, loss, or trauma, it often robs us of our sense of agency, making us feel as though we are merely reactive beings, tossed about by forces beyond our control. The initial response to such pain typically manifests as heteronomy, where our choices become dictated by the overwhelming emotions of grief, anger, or fear. We might seek validation from others, conform to expected narratives of victimhood, or allow our wounds to dictate our actions toward ourselves and others. Yet the woman who has genuinely strengthened her spirit through suffering exhibits a profound shift toward what Kant would recognize as true autonomy. She no longer allows her pain to serve as the determining factor of her moral choices, but rather engages her rational faculty to establish principles that guide her actions, independent of her emotional state. Consider how different this is from what our culture often portrays as healing. Popular psychology frequently encourages us to prioritize emotional catharsis and validation, sometimes at the expense of examining the rational principles that should guide our response to pain. A woman displaying this first sign does not dismiss her emotions. Rather, she refuses to allow them sovereign control over her will. She recognizes, as Kant did, that our dignity as human beings lies precisely in this capacity to act according to self-imposed rational principles, rather than being driven by the causal forces of emotional reaction. In practical terms, this manifests as a woman who, despite having experienced profound betrayal, does not allow her pain to justify betraying others or compromising her own moral standards. She, who has been abandoned, does not abandon her commitments to others out of fear of being hurt again. She who has been deceived does not embrace deception as a protective strategy. This represents not a denial of her pain, but rather a transcendence of it through the exercise of her uniquely human capacity for moral reasoning. I want to pause here and ask you directly, how many times have you struggled to reclaim your sense of moral autonomy after experiencing deep pain? That feeling that your wounds are making decisions for you rather than your rational, authentic self. You are not alone. Many of us carry this silent struggle. This desire to truly understand how to prevent our suffering from controlling our moral choices. I would love for you to share your experience in the comments. Something as simple as, "My greatest challenge in reclaiming autonomy after pain is ghee." Your comment not only helps me create content more directly addressing your real needs, but also builds a community where others, who might be facing the same obstacles as you, can feel understood and less alone in their philosophical journey. It is through this sincere exchange that we grow together. So please, pause the video for a moment and share your experience. Your voice matters more than you might imagine. The second sign emerges in how a spiritually strengthened woman relates to her own dignity and that of others. Kant's conception of human dignity is grounded in his famous formulation of the categorical imperative. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. Pain often distorts our perception of human worth, including our own. A woman who has been devalued through abuse, discrimination, or objectification might initially internalize these experiences, viewing herself as diminished in worth or as defined primarily by her utility to others. Alternatively, her pain might lead her to objectify others as she herself was objectified, seeing people as either threats to be neutralized or resources to be utilized in her process of healing. The spiritually strengthened woman, however, exhibits a profound reorientation toward human dignity. She comes to recognize her intrinsic worth as independent of her experiences, achievements, or how others have treated her. This is not mere self-esteem or positive thinking, but a deeper philosophical recognition that her value as a human being is inherent and unconditional, exactly as Kant proposed. This recognition extends beyond herself to others, even to those who may have caused her pain. This does not mean she tolerates mistreatment or maintains harmful relationships. Rather, it means she relates to all human beings as possessing inherent worth beyond their usefulness to her, beyond the pleasure or pain they may cause her. In practical terms, this manifests as a woman who neither defines herself by her victimization nor seeks validation through the accumulation of power over others. She does not instrumentalize people in her relationships, using them merely as means to fulfill her needs for security, validation, or healing. Instead, she engages with others as beings of inherent worth, even as she establishes healthy boundaries and makes discerning choices about whom to include in her life. Her relationships become characterized by mutuality rather than utility, by respect rather than control. The spiritually strengthened woman also demonstrates this sign in how she speaks about her pain and her journey. She does not commodify her suffering for attention or status within communities that valorize victimhood. She may share her story, but not to manipulate or to establish her identity primarily as one who has suffered. Instead, she speaks her truth in service of authentic connection and the recognition of our shared humanity. The third sign of spiritual strengthening after pain manifests in a woman's relationship to the concept of universality in her ethical reasoning. Kant's categorical imperative challenges us to act only according to that maxim whereby we can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. This principle remains one of the most rigorous tests for ethical action, asking us to consider whether we would want everyone to act as we do in similar circumstances. Pain often narrows our moral vision, tempting us to create exceptions for ourselves based on our suffering. We might justify actions we would condemn in others, thinking, "My situation is different. My pain grants me special dispensation from the moral rules that bind others." The woman who has strengthened her spirit moves beyond this exceptionalism. She demonstrates a willingness to subject her own actions to the same universal standards she would apply to others, even when doing so requires tremendous moral courage. This universality does not manifest as rigid rule following, but as a consistency between her moral expectations of herself and others. Consider how this contrasts with contemporary therapeutic approaches that sometimes emphasize individual healing at the expense of ethical consistency. A woman displaying this third sign recognizes that her pain, while real and significant, does not exempt her from moral responsibility or place her outside the community of moral agents. She understands that genuine healing cannot come at the expense of moral integrity. In practice, this appears as a woman who, despite having been betrayed, does not claim a right to betray others. Despite having been treated unjustly, she does not embrace injustice as a weapon of self-protection. She holds herself to the same standards to which she holds others, recognizing that to do otherwise would be to deny her own moral agency and, by extension, an essential aspect of her humanity. This universality extends to how she interprets the actions of others as well. She develops the capacity to apply the same principles of charitable interpretation to those who have wronged her as she would want applied to herself. This does not mean excusing genuine wrongdoing, but rather refusing to attribute malicious intent where other explanations are possible. She becomes capable of distinguishing between people who caused her pain out of malice and those who did so out of their own woundedness, ignorance, or limitation. This nuanced moral vision allows her to respond to wrongdoing with appropriate boundaries and accountability measures without surrendering to blanket cynicism or misanthropy. The fourth sign appears in how a spiritually strengthened woman navigates the tension between the phenomenal and noumenal realms of existence, to use Kant's terminology. Kant distinguished between the world of appearances, phenomena, accessible to our senses and scientific investigation, and the world as it is in itself, noumena, which lies beyond our empirical knowledge, but can be approached through our moral intuitions and rational faculties. Pain often traps us in the phenomenal realm of immediate sensory and emotional experience. The burning intensity of grief, The sharp sting of betrayal, the crushing weight of loss these experiences can consume our consciousness, making it seem as though nothing exists beyond our immediate suffering. The woman who has strengthened her spirit develops the capacity to maintain awareness of the noumenal dimension even while fully acknowledging her phenomenal experience of pain. She neither denies the reality of her suffering nor allows it to become the totality of her existence. She recognizes that beyond the world of cause and effect, beyond the mechanical operations of pleasure and pain, lies a realm of meaning, purpose, and moral truth that transcends her immediate experience. This is not magical thinking or spiritual bypassing. It is rather the recognition that our humanity encompasses more than our sensory and emotional responses to the world. As Kant argued, our capacity for moral reasoning gives us a glimpse into a dimension of reality that transcends the deterministic chains of cause and effect that govern the natural world. In practical terms, this manifests as a woman who can say, "Yes, this happened to me. Yes, it caused me immense pain. And yet there is more to who I am and what my life means than this experience of suffering." She neither minimizes her pain nor becomes defined by it. She acknowledges the reality of what happened while simultaneously recognizing that the full truth of her existence encompasses more than what is accessible through empirical observation or emotional response. This woman becomes capable of finding meaning in her suffering, not by denying it, but by locating it within a larger framework of purpose and ethical development. She comes to understand that while she cannot control many of the causal forces that bring pain into her life, she remains free in how she incorporates that pain into her understanding of herself and her moral obligations to others. This integration of the phenomenal and noumenal perspectives allows her to honor her suffering without being imprisoned by it. The fifth sign of spiritual strengthening manifests in a woman's relationship to the Kantian concept of the highest good, which he defined as the perfect alignment of virtue and happiness. For Kant, this represents the ultimate goal of ethical life, though one that may not be fully realizable in our earthly existence. Pain often shatters our naive assumptions about the relationship between virtue and happiness. We may have been raised to believe that good things happen to good people, that if we follow the rules and fulfill our obligations, we will be spared from suffering. When pain enters our lives despite our best efforts to live virtuously, this can trigger a profound existential crisis. The spiritually strengthened woman emerges from this crisis with a more nuanced understanding of the relationship between virtue and happiness. She no longer expects an immediate correlation between moral action and pleasant outcomes. Instead, she develops what Kant might recognize as a mature moral faith, a commitment to goodness that transcends self-interest and operates independent of external rewards. This does not mean she embraces suffering as intrinsically valuable or adopts a posture of passive resignation toward injustice. Rather, it means she pursues virtue because she recognizes its intrinsic worth, not as a transaction to secure comfortable circumstances. In practical terms, this appears as a woman who continues to act with kindness, integrity, and compassion, even when these actions do not yield immediate benefits to her. She does not abandon her moral principles when they prove costly or inconvenient. Nor does she become bitter about the apparent disconnect between virtue and happiness in her immediate experience. Instead, she maintains faith in the ultimate meaningfulness of ethical action, while accepting that the full harmony of goodness and well-being may lie beyond what she can perceive or experience in any given moment. This mature moral orientation allows her to find a sense of purpose and dignity, even amid circumstances that may seem random, unjust, or devoid of meaning from a purely empirical perspective. She becomes capable of what Kant called moral hope, the reasoned faith that there exists a moral order to the universe, even when immediate evidence seems to suggest otherwise. This hope is not naive optimism, but a rational postulate that gives coherence to our moral intuitions and sustains ethical action even in the face of apparent futility. The sixth and final sign of a woman who has strengthened her spirit through pain emerges in her approach to the concept of duty and moral obligation. For Kant, acting from duty rather than merely in accordance with duty or from inclination represents the highest form of moral action. Pain often disrupts our relationship to duty in two opposing ways. On one hand, it may lead us to neglect our moral obligations as we become consumed by our own suffering. On the other hand, it might drive us toward a rigid, joyless adherence to duty as a way of maintaining control in a world that suddenly seems chaotic and unpredictable. The spiritually strengthened woman finds a new relationship to duty that transcends both of these extremes. She comes to recognize her moral obligations not as external impositions that constrain her freedom, but as expressions of her rational nature and inherent dignity. She fulfills her duties not from fear, habit, or compulsion, but from a genuine recognition of their rightness and their connection to her authentic self. This transformed relationship to duty manifests in several ways. First, she becomes discerning about which obligations truly deserve the status of moral duties, distinguishing between social expectations that merely reflect convention and genuine ethical imperatives. She recognizes, for instance, that while she may have a duty of self-respect that requires her to establish boundaries around mistreatment, she has no duty to conform to others' expectations about how she should process or express her pain. Second, she develops the capacity to act from duty even when doing so does not align with her immediate emotional inclinations. This does not mean she suppresses or denies her emotions, but rather that she does not allow them to override her rational determination of what is right. She can act with kindness toward someone who has hurt her, not because she feels affection for them, but because she recognizes the moral imperative to treat all people with basic respect. Third, and perhaps most significantly, she begins to experience a harmony between duty and inclination that Kant described as moral feeling. As she consistently aligns her actions with her rational understanding of moral law, she finds that doing what is right begins to feel natural and satisfying. Her emotional responses gradually come into alignment with her rational judgments, not because she forces them to do so, but because her whole being has been reoriented toward what is good. This integration of reason and emotion, duty and inclination, represents the highest form of spiritual strengthening after pain. It allows a woman to act with both moral clarity and authentic feeling, to be both principled and compassionate, to fulfill her obligations, not as a burden, but as an expression of her truest self. If you have ever felt overwhelmed by the complexities of understanding how to truly strengthen your spirit after pain, know that you are not alone in this journey. The path to interpreting Kant's insights on human resilience need not be lonely or confusing. I invite you to subscribe to this channel and become part of a community of people who, like you, seek clarity amidst the fragmented information about how philosophy can guide our healing processes. By subscribing, you'll receive weekly reflections that transform seemingly inaccessible concepts into practical insights for your life. We are not merely studying philosophy, we are learning to think more deeply, to question with greater wisdom, and to live with more purpose. Click the subscribe button now, not as an obligation, but as a gift to your own intellectual and emotional development. And if this content has brought some clarity to you today, leave your like as a way of saying that we are together in this pursuit of true knowledge and authentic healing. Remember, understanding Kant's perspective on spiritual strengthening is not just an academic exercise. It is a way of awakening to a more conscious and authentic existence after experiencing life's inevitable pains. In reflecting on these 6 signs of women who have strengthened their spirit after pain, we can see how Kant's moral philosophy offers a framework not just for ethical action, but for genuine healing and spiritual growth. From the reclamation of autonomy to the harmonization of duty and inclination, each sign represents a distinct dimension of what it means to transform suffering into strength without compromising our moral integrity or essential humanity. What distinguishes this Kantian approach to healing from more conventional therapeutic models is its emphasis on our rational capacity and moral agency, even amid intense emotional pain. While many contemporary approaches focus primarily on emotional processing and self-acceptance, Kant reminds us that our dignity as human beings lies in our ability to act from principle rather than being determined solely by our feelings or circumstances. This is not to dismiss the importance of emotional healing, but to recognize that complete restoration of our humanity after suffering must include the reclamation of our capacity for moral reasoning and principled action. For women who have experienced profound pain, whether through abuse, loss, betrayal, or injustice, this philosophical framework offers a path to healing that honors their full humanity. It acknowledges their suffering without defining them by it. It validates their emotions without reducing them to emotional beings. It recognizes their wounds without treating them as fundamentally broken. Perhaps most importantly, it offers a vision of healing that does not depend on external circumstances or other people's actions, but remains always within reach of their own rational will. As we conclude our exploration, I invite you to consider which of these signs resonates most deeply with your own experience of pain and healing. Perhaps you recognize yourself in the woman who has reclaimed her moral autonomy, refusing to allow her pain to dictate her actions toward others. Or maybe you connect with the woman who has found a new relationship to duty, fulfilling her obligations not from compulsion, but from authentic commitment to what is right. Wherever you find yourself on this journey, know that the capacity for spiritual strengthening exists within you, by virtue of your rational nature and inherent dignity. The path from pain to moral strength may not be linear or simple, but it is always open to you as a possibility inherent in your humanity. And in that recognition lies a profound source of hope, not contingent on circumstances, but grounded in the unchangeable worth that belongs to you as a rational being capable of moral action and growth. This is the enduring gift of Kant's philosophy, to those seeking to transform their suffering into genuine spiritual strength.